Okay, so have you ever heard of the year without a summer gloomy weather? Mary Shelley writing Frankenstein. Well, get this, it was caused by a volcano. And we're not just talking about any volcano, this is Mount Tambora we're talking about.
It's wild, isn't it? But what's really interesting here is that this one event back in 1815, it still echoes through time, and not just because of the global impact.
You're right. Today's deep dive isn't just about the eruption itself, but more about Dompu, which is a kingdom in Indonesia that was literally overshadowed by Tambora. Talk about a front row seat to this massive eruption.
In their story, it's about way more than just destruction. It's about resilience rebuilding and finding opportunity when faced with this, unimaginable disaster.
We've got a lot to go on here. Historical accounts, modern analysis, even archaeological finds. It's like piecing together this giant puzzle, trying to understand how Dompu went from ashes to what it is today.
Before we get to the eruption, though, picture this Mount Tambora before all the fury. Forget that image of a brooding, menacing volcano. Instead, imagine these fertile slopes, lush forests, a source of life and not destruction.
It was a land of plenty, wasn't it? I was reading about all these bustling trade routes. What was Dompu known for?
Think exotic, cloves, peppercorns, cinnamon, all those spices were flowing right through Dompu. And then you also had beautiful textiles, gorgeous woods like sandalwood and teak. The kingdoms of Dompu and Bima, they weren't just surviving on Sumbawa Island, they were thriving thanks to all of Tambora's richness.
So we're talking about a region at its absolute peak, a hub of culture and trade, and then, boom, everything changes, April 10th, 1815, the day Tambora blew its top. Was it as sudden as it seemed, or were there warning signs?
Tambora definitely grumbled before it roared. For about 3 years before the earth shook, just these little tremors here and there. Easy to ignore, right? But then the tremors, they got more insistent. Smoke plumes started to rise. The people, they would have known something was coming, but could they have imagined the scale of this eruption? Not a chance.
You know, our sources describe the moment of eruption as this totally earth-shattering event. Like literally, the sound traveled for thousands of miles. Can you imagine hearing that?
Wow.
And the people of Dompu, just miles from the base of this volcano, it's hard to even fathom.
Entire villages were swallowed whole by those pyroclastic flows, those superheated avalanches of ash and gas. It's eerie because it's like they were frozen in time, just like a Pompeii of the East. And this wasn't just another eruption. To this day, it's still the most powerful eruption in recorded history.
Wow, now that's really saying something.
It's true. We're talking a mountain that literally lost its peak. Tambora shrunk by thousands of feet that day. That's how much force we're talking about here.
So then what happens to Dompu, like right after the eruption? What happens in those first few days and weeks?
Well, imagine this thick darkness that just descends as the ash completely blankets out the sun. Crops are totally destroyed, water sources are choked with ash, and then if that wasn't enough, you've got famine and disease starting to spread like wildfire. We estimate over 10,000 people in the immediate vicinity died just from the eruption itself. The after effects, though, we can only guess, but it's got to be a far, far greater number.
It's just heartbreaking. You're talking about an entire civilization that was nearly wiped out. Their whole world literally turned to ash.
And even amidst all that devastation, there are these incredible stories of survival. One account I read describes villagers fleeing to higher ground, carrying their families and anything they could salvage. Just imagine the chaos, the fear, but also that deep, human instinct to survive, to protect the things that really matter most.
It's amazing, isn't it? You think facing that level of destruction would completely demoralize people, but it didn't. This is where Dompu's story really shifts from tragedy to resilience, don't you think?
Absolutely. And it's remarkable because even as the ash was still settling, the people of Dompu, they started to rebuild. It wasn't just about clearing debris. They had to find completely new ways to farm, to purify their water sources, to literally nourish the land that had just been stripped completely bare.
Right. It makes you realize just how deep their knowledge of the land was, their ability to adapt. I mean, they had to adapt everything they knew to this totally transformed environment. But they weren't alone in this whole thing, were they? You mentioned the Sultans of Dompu earlier. What role did they play in all this?
Oh, the sultans were absolutely critical. Think about it. They lost everything, too, in the eruption. And yet they stepped up as these, beacons of hope, real leaders. They organized all the relief efforts, rallied their people, sought aid from neighboring kingdoms. They even implemented all these new agricultural practices, using all the knowledge that had been passed down from their ancestors and adapting it to this, ash-covered land.
Wow, that's fascinating. We always think of volcanic ash as this destructive force, which it is, but wasn't there something about the ash from Tambora that actually helped to revitalize the soil?
Yeah, that's right. It's one of those weird ironies about this story. While initially devastating, over time, that volcanic ash, it broke down and actually ended up enriching the soil. And Dompu's farmers, they started to notice their crops flourishing in this revitalized land. There was this one specific type of rice, known for being really hardy, that thrived in that ash-enriched soil. It ended up becoming a staple in their post-eruption diet.
Wow, so this awful event, like in a weird way, paves the way for this agricultural rebirth, almost like a phoenix rising from the ashes, wouldn't you say?
Definitely a fitting analogy, and you know that connection to the land. It goes way deeper than just survival for them. The people of Dompu, they wove the story of that eruption into their whole cultural identity. They even composed songs and poems about it, passing down these tales of survival to each generation.
It became this story of resilience, this testament to their strength. It's really interesting how just one event can have such a massive impact on a culture, on their whole identity.
It reminds us that history, it isn't just about dates and events, you know? It's about the stories we tell about ourselves, the lessons we choose to carry forward. And when it comes to Dompu, it's really about how a community can find unity and strength in the face of unimaginable loss.
Tambora's reach wasn't just limited to Dompu, though, was it? That's where we get into the whole year without a summer thing, right? This global event that was triggered by one eruption. Yeah, we talked about the impact on Dompu, but this eruption wasn't just one island it devastated. It sent these shockwaves across the globe.
Imagine this massive cloud of ash so thick it blocks out the sun, and not just over Dompu, I mean spreading all across the globe and lingering in the atmosphere for months. That's what happened in 1816, the year after the eruption.
The year without a summer.
Exactly. And that wasn't just some catchy name. Global temperatures plummeted. Crops totally failed. Imagine in June here in the US there were reports of snow. Crazy, right? And Europe, even worse. They were dealing with famine, social unrest, it was a global crisis, and it was all set off by this one event, like halfway across the world.
It's almost impossible to wrap your head around.
Hmm.
A volcano in Indonesia causing these widespread crop failures in Europe and North America.
It shows you just how interconnected our world really is, you know? How something that seems so far away can have this ripple effect that's felt globally. But what about the people of Dompu? While everyone else is dealing with the fallout from this eruption, they're showing incredible resilience.
So let's bring it back to Dompu. They survived this massive eruption, they rebuilt their lives, they even saw their agriculture flourish. Where do we find Dompu today? What's it like living in the shadow of this, legendary volcano?
Dompu today, it's a testament to that resilience we're talking about. The land, which was once buried in ash, it's lush and fertile again. Agriculture is still a huge part of their lives, just like it was before the eruption. But there's this really cool new dimension, too. Ecotourism.
So people are actually drawn to this place, not in spite of the volcano, but because of it.
Exactly. People travel from all over to experience the raw beauty of Mount Tambora. They hike to the caldera, explore the volcanic slopes, and just witness the power of nature's renewal. And it's not just the volcano either. The whole surrounding region is exploding with biodiversity. The forests have all grown back, and it's home to all these unique plants and animals.
It seems like Dompu is finding that balance,
Yeah.
between this natural wonder and protecting it.
Right. They've established this Tambora National Park, which is dedicated to conserving this really unique ecosystem. It's a tough thing to do, isn't it? Encouraging sustainable tourism, but also making sure the land, the wildlife, the essence of Tambora, it's all protected for future generations.
It speaks to that long-term vision that I think a lot of places could really learn from. Dompu understands the power of nature, both its beauty and its potential for destruction. They've seen how quickly things can change, how even this giant mountain can be humbled.
And yet, there's this sense of optimism that you can feel in Dompu. They don't hide from their past, from the story of the eruption. They've made it part of who they are, a reminder of their strength and resilience. You see it everywhere. Their museums, their festivals, their traditional dances, they all tell the story of Tambora, of destruction and rebirth.
We started with this volcano and a year without a summer, but it's become about so much more, hasn't it? It's about the power of humanity to adapt, to overcome, to find hope, even in the ashes of devastation.
And to realize that resilience comes with respect. Respect for the land, for history, and for that delicate balance that allows life not just to endure, but to thrive.
As we wrap up this deep dive into Mount Tambora and the people of Dompu, I keep thinking about that idea. finding opportunity in the face of disaster. It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always potential for renewal, for growth, for a different kind of future. What other stories of resilience are unfolding around us, hidden in plain sight? It's something I'll be thinking about, and I hope you will too. Thanks for joining us for this incredible journey into the heart of Dompu.